Hello, everybody. My name is Julia, and welcome to my digital classroom. Today, we're going to be diving deep into Lesson 1 on our unit on the executive branch of the American government. Today's topic is the President's Cabinet. Our source, as always, is iCivics. You can view the resources for this lesson with the QR code on the top right. And, of course, I'm committed, as always, to delivering you full lessons in 10 minutes or less. So let's jump right into it. Our lesson objectives for today are centered all around the cabinet. We're going to talk about the origin and the purpose of the cabinet, the process of becoming a cabinet member. We're going to list what all the cabinet positions are, and we're going to talk about how politics can impact the success of the presidency based on who the president nominates for the cabinet. Let's go back to the Constitution. The Constitution tells us that the president may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments. That's fancy talk for saying that the president can get some advice from his or her cabinet. So basically, the government has 16 different departments that all focus on different important things in America. And then each of those departments has one person in charge. The people who are all in charge get to meet and sit on the president's cabinet. We'll dive deeper into that in a moment. I know that sounded a little bit confusing. But the cabinet is essentially just a group of leaders in the government who are selected by the president, who meet regularly to discuss policies and to help advise the president in whatever decisions that he or she needs to make. So, what again is the cabinet? I know, it was a lot. So, the very first cabinet had four people on it. The first was the Secretary of State. So, the Secretary of State is the leader of the Department of State, if that makes sense. So, the Secretary of State negotiates treaties with foreign nations. That has been important since the very dawn of our country, which is why there are only four here. We now have 16, so we've added them as we've needed them. This is what we started with. Thomas Jefferson was our first Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton was our first Secretary of the Treasury, which is just the person who deals with the money and the banking. The Secretary of War is the military officer who is in charge with helping with any military decisions. That first person was Henry Knox. And of course, this is important because the president is in charge of the military. So making sure that there's a good Secretary of War is always key because they will need that good advice. Finally, there's the Attorney General, who is basically a lawyer or a counselor to any government legislatures. The first one was as Edmund Randolph. James Madison was actually the person to coin the term cabinet, if you did not know that. That was just a little bit of trivia. Same with the people. However, those four key cabinet members are very important, so try and commit those to memory. Again, that's the Secretary of State, Treasury, War, and the Attorney General. Now, like I said, there are 16 of them. Who could they possibly be? But first, let's talk about getting on the cabinet in the first place. First, the president has to nominate somebody, which basically means that the president gives a list of people over to Congress, and the Congress looks at these people and they hold small committee meetings, which are just small groups of Senate members. They meet and they start to narrow down who they think would be a good fit for these cabinet positions. They talk about the pros and cons of all these people, they investigate them by the FBI, and so slowly this list gets smaller and smaller until they are ready to be investigated by the entire Senate. So then the Senate holds huge meetings with everyone involved to try and knock as many people out as possible, get down to the smallest group, and then a debate is held when 2/3 of the Senate agrees to stop all the hearings and take a vote. A simple majority will put that person in place. Simple majority is just the highest score wins. So out of 100 Senate members, if 51, a majority, decide to vote that person in or out, then that person is in or out based on that vote. So again, just to briefly review that process, first they are nominated, then they are reviewed by a small committee in the Senate, then the whole Senate reviews them, and once 2/3 of them are ready to vote, they take a vote, and a simple majority wins. So that's how you get on the cabinet, but who's on it? There are 16 departments, therefore 16 cabinet positions. So let's go over them very briefly. So, first is our Secretary of State. Again, we already talked about that. They deal with foreign policy and any international relations. Then there's the Secretary of Treasury, who deals with money. Secretary of Defense, who deals with the military. The Attorney General, who deals with law enforcement or the prevention and control of crime. Now, notice after this, there are different dates for whenever the different Senate positions, were put in place. Or, I'm sorry, the cabinet positions. This is important because they really only came up as they were needed. So, for example, the Secretary of the Interior was created in 1849, and their role is to protect natural and cultural resources and deal with any Native American tribes. This is relevant because the 1849 that was about the time of the gold rush and lots of expansion in the United States. So this person became very relevant because that's what was needed at the time. So that's also true for any time another role was put in place. So then we have the Secretary of Agriculture. They deal with food, food safety, natural resources. That's pretty self explanatory. The Secretary of Commerce deals with the economic development and policy and any technology. And the Secretary of Labor deals with work safety, any unfair pay, unemployment insurance, so on and so forth. For our last page, we have the Secretary of Health and Human Services. They deal with health policy. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development they deal with home ownership, community development, so on and so forth. A lot of these, their names point pretty closely to what they do. Secretary of Transportation, again, the transportation system. Secretary of Energy, they deal with energy, environmental, or nuclear issues. The Secretary of Education, educational policies, student loans, that kind of thing. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs, they support any U.S. military veterans. And then the last one, the most recent addition in 2002, was the Secretary of Homeland Security. They deal with national security, border management, natural disaster support, immigration, stuff like that. Now, this is another obvious one as for why it was created. 2002 shortly followed the 9/11 attacks, so the president at the time felt that it was very necessary to have someone who is very knowledgeable in this area. Interesting, right? So, this is just a reiteration of what we've already talked about. Sometimes it helps me to connect pictures to names, so if you want to pause this video and just take a look at all the cabinet positions, commit them to memory, please do so. Okay, that is all I have for you today. No assignments for our lesson 1, just something to ease you in, cabinet positions. If you have any questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out to me on Twitter at Giulia Pucci EDU. You can also find me on my website. You can scan the QR code there or just type in the URL. All my contact information can be found there. Also, don't hesitate to ask your teachers. I'll see you again with lesson 2. Bye.